Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on making offshore wind work for Latin American markets. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. It's a real pleasure, and it's great to be dealing with two subjects that are near and dear to our hearts. One is our recent publication on making offshore wind work, which is a 2025 revision of the key factors for successful development in offshore wind markets report, and then also shining a spotlight on the application of these lessons from making offshore wind work to two case studies in Latin America, Brazil, and Colombia. So maybe just by way of housekeeping, if everybody can obviously keep your microphones muted, that would be appreciated. And also, if you have any questions, then you can type them into the chat. And at the end of the webinar, we will go through that in a Q&A period. And you can certainly enter your questions in English, Portuguese, or Spanish as you prefer. So what we're going to actually start out with some opening remarks from a dear friend of the program, Roberta Cox, and then I'm going to go into a discussion of provide some highlights of the Making Offshore Wind Work report, which is, as I said, is a 2025 release of our key factors report. And then I'm going to turn the microphone over to Carolina Damas, who is going to put a spotlight on Brazil, the case study of the work that we've been doing in Brazil over these past few years. And then I'm going to turn it over to Claire McGregor, who is going to talk about the case study of Colombia. And then we'll have a Q&A, and we should have about 20 minutes at the end for this. Maybe quickly, just by way of introductions, I'm Sean Whitaker. So I'm the co-lead of the World Bank Group's Offshore Wind Development Program based in Washington. And I wanted to, let's start off with some opening remarks from Roberta Cox, who's a policy director for Brazil for the Global Wind Energy Council. And as I said, Roberta is a dear friend of the program, and Roberta is one of the three people, I think, in Brazil who I call the kind of the three horsemen, the people in offshore wind who have been there really from the start. And Roberta, I remember when she was working at IBAMA, this is, in the early days of Brazil's offshore wind work, was the one that was responsible for publishing these great maps showing the applications for permits which had been received by IBAMA. And following Roberta's maps, you could see the steady progress of interest in Brazil amounting to where it is today with a tremendous number of permit applications that are in, and that was really the first indication that that Brazil was going to be a market to watch. And then Roberta went on to the Ministry of Environment, where she is an advisor to the minister, and has since moved on to the Global Wind Energy Council. So she's really been there from the start. And we're really pleased to have her here today to provide some opening remarks and some context for this webinar today. So over to you, Roberta.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's a big pleasure to be here at this event with the World Bank. It's a great satisfaction to be with this partner that has Well, like Sean said, my name is Roberta Cox. I am the Brazilian director for the Global Wind Energy Council, the GWEC. I have been with GWEC for over 2 years, but like Sean said, I started working with offshore wind here in Brazil when I was at IBAMA, the Brazil's Environment Agency. I'm still officially on the IBAMA staff, just on an unpaid leave of absence, but I'm really enjoying work at GWEC to boost the offshore wind market and the energy transition in Brazil. So I'm very happy to work in GWEC and with World Bank as a partner in this agenda. Well, I recall the very first license request that arrived at IBAMA. My boss passed it to me around 2017, 16, 17. We have meetings and they really ask for a term of reference. And I need to draft a term of reference to request the environment impact studies. Then with this study, IBAMA, we would we need to assemble a team and evaluate the findings, hold a public hearing, involve all interview agents, verify conflicts. So this term of reference, this is a big challenge. So I was contemplating what kind of environment and social impacts that undertaking would have, and in an offshore wind in the middle of the sea. And we are thinking about, my boss gave to me because I am environmental engineer and I work a little bit with offshore oil and gas at IBAMA as well. So they put in my table and said, draft a term of reference, please. So we begin seeking training and partnerships. We did a very nice partnership with European Union in the sectorial dialogues. It's a program they have to push for energy transition and new technologies in emerging markets. So they give us a very nice support, and we were able to make a very big workshop, international workshop at IBAMA. So when my boss put in my table this first asking for environmental license, we had a legal deadline in the government. So we ended up sending out a huge, a very, very huge, big, very huge term of reference, overlay demand this term of reference, while we worked on the standard term of reference, which was finalized only in 2019. So in the middle of this, we held an international workshop inviting 7 different countries to share their experience and the impacts of offshore wind. We developed studies involving Navy, the Minister of Environment, Minister of Mines and Energy, and various other agents to discuss offshore wind. And IBAMA eventually have over 200 open process requesting environmental license. And many investors were interested in Brazil. So we have a big coast and a very great wind, and not so deep. We have shallow waters, so the investors are very interested in Brazil. So they just keeping going and put process and asking for license at IBAMA. And we have 200 process, but we don't have the law. The ocean is, it's an open space. We don't have owners for the ocean, and we need to provide the space for the investor building his offshore wind. So we need a law to provide this concession of the space. So a regulatory framework was proposed. The law put forward by the Senator Jean-Paul Prats, which was finalized, sanctioned in January of this year. So Brazil represents a massive market with studies indicate that we possess some of the best winds in the world. So we are now very excited waiting the announcement of the first auction to maintain the investor interest and generate jobs and growth to Brazil. And now I think I just want to thanks to World Bank, and I pass to you back, Sean.
Thank you so much, Roberta. It's when we look at all the markets that all the countries that we've worked in, there's always a handful of individuals who are really responsible for initiating those markets and bringing them to where they are today. And certainly, Roberta, big tip of the hat to you for all the work that you've done and continue to do in advancing offshore wind in Brazil. So I'm going to just quickly provide an overview of the offshore wind development program and some of the work that we've been doing to date, and then I'm going to turn to a quick summary of the Making Offshore Wind Work report, and then I'll pass it off to Claire and Carolina for case studies on Colombia and Brazil. So it's important to step back, in the current environment where there's offshore wind in the headlines, and we're reading a lot about things, some of the challenges that the sector has been facing. It's really important, I think, to step back and to look at the basic logic of offshore wind and why it makes so much sense. And the logic is simple. This is large scale, clean, competitively priced power that is close to demand. And nowhere is that more the case than in emerging markets. And the map that you see here is the result of some work that we did early in the program looking at technical potential. And we found that there was over 16 terawatts of total technical potential across emerging markets. Pretty much any way you paint it, offshore wind is going to figure prominently in the energy futures of many of these emerging markets. So the program itself was started in 2019. It is jointly managed by the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, and this is a trust fund that exists within the World Bank that is funded by a series of donors that provide a long-term mandate for ESMAP to do this kind of work in emerging markets, and it's jointly managed between ESMAP and the International Finance Corporation. The objective of the program is very simple. It's to accelerate the development of offshore wind in emerging markets. And to date, over our 6 years, we have worked with over 26 countries around the world. We focus most of our efforts on 8 countries in particular. So that's the Philippines, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, India, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, and Colombia. And in this work, we collaborate with a series of partners who we hold very dear, as they have the same kind of ambitions as we do to develop offshore wind in these markets. So, Global Wind Energy Council, AGOA, the OEP, WFO, and a series of other partners are groups that we work with on a very close basis. So some of the things that we do, we started out doing kind of technical potential mapping and, just providing kind of educational resources for folks interested in developing offshore wind. And then we tend to move to roadmaps, which are kind of lay the foundations for development of offshore wind in a given market, kind of figures out all the pieces of the puzzle that need to be in place to make offshore wind work. And then it's our work has slowly moved to more bespoke guidance for governments as they actually look to implement the strategies that they've established. So we'll talk a little bit about this evolution in the program in a little bit. So the program team consists of a group of us within the World Bank and then a series of expert advisors who are the creme de la creme of the offshore wind world. It's our dream team. It's led by the 4 country leads, including Carolina, who leads our work in LAC and with a focus on Colombia and Brazil, and supported by advisors who cover a range of topics within offshore wind, everything from leasing and permitting to geospatial mapping to advisory on developing contract for difference or offtake. We've got specialists in resource measurement and so on. So this group is we put at the disposal of the countries where we work to provide them with the kind of advice they need to go from sort of these ambitions or strategies that they put in place for offshore wind all the way through to execution. And the work, it's important is to step back and look at just how far a number of these countries have come in the past 6 years. When we started the program in 2019, there was very little work underway in emerging markets. I mean, we had Roberta and her colleagues who were had 5 gigawatts of applications for permits in Brazil, but in places like the Philippines, Vietnam, Colombia, there was really no offshore wind was not part of the conversation at that point. If you fast forward to today, things have changed remarkably. We're now in Brazil. I've lost count after I think 220 gigawatts of permit applications are in. In the Philippines, they are currently working on their first green energy auction for offshore wind. It's going to be released later this year. And they've got 90 service contracts, over 67 gigawatts that have been mapped out. Vietnam, a country that sees offshore wind as one of the major contributors to its energy plan going forward. And then Colombia, and Claire is going to talk a bit about the specifics in Colombia, but they released a roadmap and then have targeted between 9 to 18 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050, and are about to release the seabed leasing tender. We're working on a seabed leasing tender that is due actually in a few weeks. So again, the world of offshore wind in emerging markets has really evolved rapidly over the past 6 years. And as those markets have evolved, the way that our program works with these countries has evolved as well. As I said, we started out with general kind of education, technical potential maps, etc. And then the first iteration of the key factors report. And then we moved to roadmaps. So we kind of went from 100,000 feet down to 50,000 feet and said, okay, here's the pieces of the puzzle that you need to put in place to make offshore wind work. And now much more of our work is is at the country level. So bespoke assistance to governments as they actually try to implement these strategies. And so they're doing seabed leasing, as is the case in Colombia, or they are doing sectoral planning, as the case in Vietnam and Brazil, and then in Philippines actually launching their first offtake tender later on this year. So that's kind of a quick overview of the program itself. And if you want, we often say to people, if you want to kind of understand what the DNA of our program is and the kind of advice that we provide to governments, it's really summarized in this report, which we originally released in 2021, which is called Key Factors for Successful Development of Offshore Wind in Emerging Markets. And we came out with a revision of this report in April of this year called Making Offshore Wind Work. And we're thankful for the analytical work that was provided here by BVG Associates. The purpose is really to distill lessons from established markets to the benefit of emerging markets. And it's really important to say that the recommendations in the Key Factors report are directional rather than prescriptive. The intention of this report is not to say that you shall do this or you shall do this. It's to say, look, here's the different approaches that have been taken by different markets, and here's some of the pros and cons of those approaches, because it recognizes the fact that ultimately different countries pursue offshore wind for different reasons. And based on the reasons that they set out for pursuing offshore wind, it changes the way that they go about implementing that strategy. So again, the recommendations are more directional than prescriptive. In the 2025 edition, we had some new content that we've drawn from our experience in working in emerging markets over the past 6 years. Some topics like finance mobilization, some marine spatial planning, environmental and social sensitivity mapping, and this is drawing on the ESMAP approach that we report that we released last year, and also another report that we released on community benefit sharing that has also been incorporated within this newest revision. And then obviously, looking at advances in technology and green hydrogen, etc. The foundation of the original key factors report and what continues to be its foundation now in the 2025 revision are what we call these 4 pillars. And they are the kind of the 4 cornerstones of building a successful offshore wind market. And I'll dig into each one of them in a bit more detail, but at a high level, you start out with the strategy, which is essentially trying to figure out why you're pursuing offshore wind in the first place. Once you've figured out that strategy, then you implement the policies that are required to make that strategy a reality. And this is very much focused on long-term targets, timelines, allocation of responsibility for who does what. Once you've got the strategy in place and you've got the policies to make them a reality, then you have to move to the frameworks. And this is where where you really start getting into the details. And this is like development of leasing processes, of offtake models, of marine spatial planning, etc. And then finally, as you move into the 4th phase, or the fourth pillar, which is delivery, and this is actually executing on the strategy, policy, and frameworks. So this is looking at supply chain development, at health and safety, etc. We often like to say a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And within offshore wind, given its complexity, there is a lot of links in the chain. But all of those links are represented in these 4 pillars. And if by focusing on them in sequence and giving them the attention that they deserve, then we're confident that will be a very strong chain going forward. So just to dive quickly into each one of the pillars, pillar number 1 is the strategy. And this is really, as I said, trying to figure out why the country is pursuing offshore wind in the first place. And it varies a tremendous amount from one market to another. You go to a place like Vietnam, their main driver for offshore wind has to do with the fact that they don't have many indigenous energy sources. They've got offshore wind and natural gas. So this is a really key driver for them. You turn to Brazil, and Caroline is going to talk about this. One of their big drivers is managing the interannual variability of hydro, and offshore wind is particularly well suited to this task. In other places, in the Philippines and in Sri Lanka or India, they're looking at this as a cost competitive source of generation and a driver of economic development. So again, the first pillar is really predicated on the idea that the country has to figure out what it is that they're trying to accomplish with offshore wind development. Then it moves into the policies. Once you figured out, the direction that the ship is pointing, then the policies, start the engines. And this is where you're looking at putting in either a single or kind of a comprehensive policy that looks at the volume and timescales of development. It looks at the cost of energy progression that you expect that comes as a result of those volume and timescales. It looks at, the policies for local jobs and economic benefits, policies around E&S and making sure that the development of offshore wind is consistent not only with local and national standards, but also with international standards around bankability. Then you move to pillar 3, which are the frameworks. And again, this is things like marine spatial planning, leasing and permitting, offtake and revenue. And Claire's going to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been that she's been leading in Colombia, looking at offtake and revenue and the release of the first contract for difference in LAC. But also things like ports and grids, health and safety. This is, again, this is the devil is in the details, and these are difficult things to get right. But the report provides kind of guidance on how different jurisdictions have dealt with these, and again provides kind of directions and suggestions for countries looking to develop these frameworks. And then finally get to delivery, which is actually executing through development of the supply chain, looking at some of the collaborative work that's been done in Western Europe on development of supply chain, on the development of ports, financing, transmission, etc. So, and again, all of these are critical mechanisms to getting offshore wind right. So before, just to close on the report, and please do download it and take a look through it. It is our Bible. It describes everything that we think about, how we think about offshore wind through all its phases. The main messages that come out of key factors are, number one, that the importance of vision and commitment. Two, the need for long-term planning. Offshore wind is a big undertaking, and it requires those long-term timelines to make it work for both governments, ratepayers, and for industry as well. It requires a great deal of coordination and frameworks, and this has certainly been the case in Colombia and Brazil, where just different agencies are having to take on different responsibilities, and being able to coordinate between those agencies is extremely important. And ultimately collaborating with industry. I think what ultimately to build a successful sector, the private sector has to be there building these wind farms for the benefit of the country. And obviously that dialogue goes both ways. So what works for government has to work for industry and vice versa. So with that, I'll pass over to Carolina, who is going to give us a first profile, the first case study, looking specifically at the case of Brazil. So over to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much for the introduction. And before diving into our case studies, I wanted to share that this report actually changed my career. And I'm being really honest here. I used to be an engineer, very narrow focus on cost, on feasibility, of my early stage projects, that were on my desk. And this opened up a world of, the myriad of things that you need to consider, right, when trying to develop a new market. So I wanted to highlight that one can read the report through different lenses. You can do that from government perspective as a public servant to try to understand the key elements that will bring economic, social, and environmental value to the market that you're helping to enable. But you can do so as an investor, a developer, and use the report as a kind of your holistic de-risking checklist, if you wish. But you can also do that as a civil society, right, to help you establish an educated and challenging dialogue with authorities and developers equally. So in our program, we have used the report as our guiding light to shape the assistance to our client governments, while at the same time embedding the specific regional and country, processes and particularities. This means that each country has to go through its own journey, but we also love governments talking to each other. So anytime we have a chance, we try to convene and facilitate these changes. What we propose for today is to start with Brazil, for many regarded as the sleeping giant in Latin America due to the massive but unrealized potential for offshore wind development. And then we will move on to Colombia, which, as many of you may know, they're taking the lead in being on having the first active commercial scale seabed tender round for the continent. So next slide, please, Sean. So starting with Brazil, since 2019, we have been focusing on nurturing relationships with the Brazilian government and facilitating opportunities to learn on targeted topics, be it through field trips, in person or online webinars, and in alignment with the stage 1 of our program support that Sean explained earlier. And I think I can see on the left-hand side of the picture the 2 other horsemen of Brazil offshore wind, right, Sean? That's Gustavo from EPE, the research office in the Energy Research Office in Brazil, and also Karina from the Ministry of Mines and Energy. So they've been there since the beginning. And along this time, we all know that the government has been publishing a number of technical studies, economic models, important to justify their preliminary regulatory developments, such as the decree, you may remember it, and Portarias from 2022. But last year, we hit a major milestone when we launched the Scenarios for Offshore Wind Development report. You can see the cover page here. And this was done in cooperation with the ministry and also EPE. And it outlines the challenges and opportunities associated with different offshore wind development pathways, and essentially becomes a roadmap to inform the specific country actions to be taken. So the picture at the bottom here, you can see many of us during the launch event last year in Brasilia. And we were actually, I must say, we were all super impressed by the traction it got from the press, from different government agencies attending, and so much that we actually had to extend our trip for one day. And we stayed there with all these agencies providing in-person capacity building workshops. For some, it was the first time that they ever heard about offshore wind. Some others were more versed. It was fantastic to see the interaction across different agencies and ministries. So you could say that was the seed for the offshore wind working group that we're going to talk in a minute. We can now then analyze the latest developments in the Brazil market by connecting it with the pillars for market development that Sean also just shown. If you can go to the next slide, Sean, please. Perfect. So as always, we want to start with the strategy pillar, and the question there would be, does it really make sense to develop offshore wind in Brazil? And as you can see in the quote here on the left, the government has shared its vision and commitment to this technology many times. And the Scenarios report also shed a light on the potential role of this technology in economic and job development for the country, and also the role in the energy mix. I recall that during the development of the Scenarios report last 2 years ago, we were very excited to see that, the offshore wind output seemed to be strongest in the months when water levels were lower, right? And seeing that great complementarity, that was an eye-opening exercise, something that we had not realized in the past. Also, we thought, how lucky is Brazil to have exactly, good offshore wind resource paired with in the vicinity of big demand centers of nearby large cities like Rio or Fortaleza or Porto Alegre, right? So all these things really tick in the boxes of having a sound strategy for the country. If we can go to the next slide, please, Sean. Then the next question would be, is then Brazil developing policies needed to realize that strategy? So first of all, in line with what Roberta mentioned, the law 15097 was enacted in January, and it truly provides a robust legal basis to develop projects within the country's exclusive economic zone. We also saw last week that the government's offshore wind working group, the Offshore GT, has been formally created. It encompasses 23 institutions that will be working collaboratively to develop secondary regulations. But the good thing is that they've been meeting since July last year. So it's a mechanism that works, and we've been providing a number of targeted webinars along this past month. And also worth highlighting that our program has engaged the consultancy RINA to support government in preparing a stakeholder engagement plan in order to help them undertake dialogue with the public and provide visibility of their plans going forward. Nonetheless, what's pending? Well, maybe we have yet to see how the supply chain plans for offshore wind will be shaped. And for this, a long-term visibility of deployment will certainly help, as well as trying to understand the synergies across countries in Latin America, for instance, see how other markets develop, right, and how they can work collaboratively. And to make sure that government officials realize the sheer magnitude of all these components and the industry that they need to develop, we took them to the United Kingdom last summer to visit the Siemens Gamesa blade factory at Hull. They also saw the port and saw a wind farm in real action. So we're trying to also pair all that theory with doses of first-hand impressions, which are always very helpful. And I think we can move then to frameworks. And the question here would be, is Brazil working on the regulations needed to the risk investment in this new market? The answer is again, certainly yes. And I just wanted to highlight a few. I'm sure the audience has in mind many others. First of all, on top left corner, we can see that EPE has proposed a methodology for sectoral spatial planning to identify seabed areas for lease in Brazil. In our program, we plan to help them accelerate this process by feeding the environmental and social attributes that would be sensitive to offshore wind development, and also connecting the dots with all the ongoing maritime spatial plans in the country. So the purpose is really to fast track this process by feeding as much information as possible, not only desktop based, but also going to the field and talking to communities and the regions that are aware of these sensitivities. Then other examples to mention would be that, a key element is certainly to attract private investment to ensure, and for that we need to ensure bankable offtake agreements. For this reason, we're currently also supporting the Ministry of Mines and Energy to identify and model potential commercialization pathways and to minimize impact to end consumer. And another thing I wanted to highlight here would be also the need to have a clear permitting process that is mentioned on the pillar. As many of you may know, that the Brazil aims to develop a PUC portal, like a one-stop shop, to ensure that permitting is streamlined and fast-tracked, and everyone has visibility on how the permitting of their projects go, and have a one window to interact with the different agencies. And in terms, of course, of eventually, reaching out to communities, having balanced arrangements with them and peaceful coexistence, we have some best practice reports like the one that you can see on the bottom left corner. And we've been providing a number of webinars targeting this topic, and will be also included in our stakeholder engagement plans as well. So I think I gave a lot of information here. Please, over to you, Claire, then to cover Colombia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So yes, Colombia has great foundations for offshore wind development, as have been outlined by Sean and Carolina. The first of which is, although is having a very clear role for offshore wind in the energy mix, and although they have a very high hydro system as Brazil does, this is very impacted by the availability of water, which not only is kind of seasonal and interannual variations, we also see it challenged in a kind of climate change future. So grid resilience can really be improved by the addition of offshore wind in their energy mix. As you can see from these beautiful graphs at the bottom, it's also very, very windy, which never hurts when you're trying to develop kind of wind-based projects, because obviously the windier it is, the more well, first of all, generally the more reliable they are in terms of consistency of wind, but it also really helps bring the cost down on a per unit basis. And then finally, we have very strong political commitment. So if Gustavo and Roberta and Karina are the three horsemen in Brazil, we have Arturo and Ingrid Amaya supporting, and Albeiro, who's also supporting from the World Bank in Colombia. And that, so the award that Arturo won in 2023 at the Global Offshore Wind Awards as an Aspiring Leaders Award was really recognizing the kind of long-term political commitment that we've seen in Colombia towards working towards these goals. So we started our support in 2020, scoping out the kind of helping to scope out what the roadmap would look like, and with the launch of the technical potential map by the Colombian government. And we really see the kind of continuing commitment from government through their launching the roadmap and the first offshore wind regulation that was issued in 2022. Interestingly, and I think very importantly from the point of view of the industry, we saw government change in 2022, and not very marginal government change either, like quite a big kind of swing, you could say, on the political spectrum, but we've really seen very continued commitment towards offshore wind as part of the Colombian energy mix. And that's the kind of political consistency which really brings brings about for projects. You know, offshore wind is a kind of 8 to 10 year development cycle. They really need that kind of reassurance that there's kind of long-term political commitment to this, regardless of electoral cycles, you can say. So the government announced the seabed leasing round that Sean alluded to at COP in late 2023. And have worked really hard to continually engage with industry over the course of that. As many of you know, the kind of period from 2023 to now has been quite challenging in offshore wind terms, and conditions have really changed a lot. But the World Bank has really supported the government and the government have been really committed to making sure that this leasing round is continually reassessed as fit for purpose in that changing environment, and that's been really important. We can kind of see the success of this engagement method, engage early and engage often, really in the kind of volume of bidders that we saw come through in the pre-qualification and pre-qualify in that round. So following that pre-qualification, the government have also worked really hard to bring forward regulation to ensure that there's an appropriate revenue model for offshore wind, and to bring that reassurance before the close of the bidding window, which, again, as Sean said, closes in a couple of weeks. Actually, it's 1 week now. But that resolution 40337, which was published in July, at the end of July, also starts the clock ticking for the regulator to bring forward the appropriate regulation to bring that policy into reality. I don't know if you want to switch to the next slide. So we kind of have on the left-hand side this leasing round, and I think it's just really a testament to the work that the government were doing. That it says here 9 companies pre-qualified, but really it's also a range of consortia and from a range of locations. So you see stalwarts of the European industry, but also stalwarts of Asia, of China, and Colombian companies all coming forward to pre-qualify for this. And there are certain elements which have been woven into the leasing round to ensure that there's a role for knowledge transfer into Colombian companies. And we see really big energy players in Colombia like Ecopetrol and Felcia also coming forward as part of that to really ensure that the value from that leasing round can really be kind of kept in Colombia, can really be retained. So we've also worked hard. So following the kind of close, a lot of the work that we were doing in that round was working to support the government to kind of continually test those pre-qualification criteria to make sure they were fit for purpose, to make sure the right developers, the right kind of profile of developer would come forward, and to make sure that the round was sufficiently attractive, especially in this very challenging offshore wind, kind of international offshore wind industry environment, you could say. And after the close of that pre-qualification, we were really focused on bringing this kind of revenue topic to the fore. You could have, as has kind of already been alluded to, you could have 5 countries that look broadly the same, but it's not to say that the energy market looks different, and so the support mechanism should be kind of tested again and again, whether it's really fit for purpose in that particular context. And so we've supported the government to undertake these 2 very specific studies. So as you can see here on the right-hand side, one with AFRI, the identification of the commercialization mechanisms for Colombia, which identified which was the right mechanism for this context. And then this much more detailed study that you can see here from right side, which is a local Colombian consultancy, which was really to assess the very particular impact on energy prices in Colombia of bringing offshore wind into the mix, and also to understand the impact on the end consumer of the mechanism itself, but also the impact on the wholesale prices. And that's something that we think is very important. it has a reputation of being a very expensive technology, and it's important to kind of recognize that not only the World Bank but the governments are always thinking about what the end impact is on the consumer, and it's important to kind of understand that you're not bringing that out of context, that we're not just pushing offshore wind for the sake of offshore wind, but we're constantly kind of testing against that theory of is that trade-off worthwhile. The study that we've done with Rightside is due to be published in Q4, and so I won't speak too much to the detail of that, but it kind of demonstrates that because of the two-way nature of the CFD that's being proposed in Colombia, that's been part of this regulation, which was published in July, we see that it can limit surge pricing in times of water scarcity, and that the kind of impact of having more zero marginal cost energy in the dispatch, particularly that which is more available in times of water scarcity, means that actually there can be and is a downwards pressure on wholesale prices, which is, in some of our cases, the net impact on the ratepayer is even positive for having this mechanism in place, because of these offsetting what having offshore wind in the mix in general brings as a economic benefit. We're not talking intangible benefits here. This is just an economic benefit calculation. Apart from that, what we saw in that study was really important in terms of grid margins and resilience, energy system resilience. So we see that in many of the scenarios that we tested, having offshore wind in the mix means that the supply-demand balance is much more comfortable and is much less tested in those system stress moments. So yeah, just that as long as you have a kind of sufficient competition in your a kind of mechanism, giving a stable revenue towards developers can also be beneficial towards ratepayers. Yeah, that's it really from the Colombian context.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I think what this, kind of illustrates is, the span from theory to practice. And I think the key factors report is very much, it outlines the theory for successful development of offshore wind, and we've seen how that translates into particular examples in the case of Colombia and Brazil. So again, just to summarize before we go to the Q&A, and please type if you have any questions, type them into the chat. Again, in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. I think the big takeaways are that offshore wind is growing quickly. It's not a matter of if, it's when and where, and that growth is solidly moving to emerging markets. Our program is there to support these markets, providing more and more bespoke guidance to the governments as they actually look at the tough part, which is the implementation. And making offshore wind work is kind of the Bible or the guide through this journey, based on these 4 pillars of strategy, policy, frameworks, and delivery. And lastly, all eyes are on LAC, on Latin America and the Caribbean, and particularly Brazil and Colombia are really at the vanguard of offshore wind in emerging markets. And it's interesting, we had a delegation from Colombia at a study tour in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of questions being asked, people in the Philippines and Vietnam that are looking at what's happening in Colombia as an example for them to follow. So the next 12 months are going to be critical in both Brazil and Colombia, but it is in good hands, certainly with people like Roberta and with all the partners working towards this common goal of accelerating offshore wind in emerging markets. So with that, we'll kick it over to the Q&A, and I'll ask Carolina maybe to see what questions we've managed to come up with on the chat. Carolina.
Thank you, Sean. So far we only have one question, so I encourage anyone else who wants to know, it can be asked. You can also ask about other countries, other geographies, if wish, within Latin America or outside. Any questions are welcome. But focusing on the question that we received, I'm going to split it into 2, and it's going to go over to you, Sean. The question is, when a desktop study is required, does ESMAP handle it internally, or do you contract an external company to do so? And if it's outsourced, where the tenders or procurement opportunities usually published?
Yeah, I mean, in those cases, we will usually outsource the work. There's two studies actually that we are working on right now that are interesting cases. There's one looking at ground conditions for offshore wind in emerging markets, and we're looking at 6 markets in particular, and that is work that is actually being undertaken by WSP on our behalf. And then there's another one on shipping risk, which we are currently contracting. So in these cases, we will generally pull in outside entities, engineering firms to do some of this desktop work. It gets a bit more complicated when it gets to the actual physical surveys. In many cases, those physical surveys, be they metocean, geotechnical, geophys, wind resource assessments where it requires equipment. These are starting to be fairly significant. They can be millions of dollars and more. So we'll often work with the country government to where we can support it. But in some, right now in Turkey, for example, where the government we're guiding some of the work that they're doing on the physical surveys. So where there's a will, there's a way. And, as we move further into data acquisition, then, we certainly rely on outside sources and work with our government partners in making sure that that data ultimately is useful to their long-term ambitions.
Very much, Sean. So another question popped up at the chat. I think this one may be over to you, Claire, in relation to the CFD scheme or the pagos por diferencia that the resolution sets out for Colombia. This person is asking whether it's going to be paid via customer tariffs in light of recent social unrest due to high electricity cost and the financial difficulties of the Caribbean region. Is the bank evaluating any support? You're on mute, Claire, sorry.
Sorry. Thank you, Jesus. This was the study that we're hoping to publish at the end of this year. And I think it's really important to take an understanding of the net impact. So although we see that there would be a tariff put on users, what we see is that the very high peak pricing, which is often a driver for higher retail electricity costs, are kind of positively impact. That is to say, those prices come down by having offshore wind in the mix. So that's what I was saying, that the net impact to the final user would be neutral. And in some of the cases that we studied would be a reduction in the net impact to the consumer, including any payments under the mechanism. Because when you have this water scarcity, you get scarcity pricing in the mix and very high electricity costs. And the slide that was in one of Carolina's slides for Brazil, that relationship between wind and hydro is also true in Colombia. So we see very high complementarity between availability of hydro and availability of wind. So what normally drives very high prices in Colombia and Brazil is this water scarcity issue. So where we have El Niño phenomena, we have actually much higher availability of wind in that time. So the kind of impact that has is to bring down prices overall, and that can be a positive impact over the course of a year, so to say, when you're going through that system stress event. So although, we do see a user tariff, what we've been assessing is what is the real impact to the end consumer, because we take that very seriously, not only as the bank but of course as the government. We take that very, very seriously in understanding what is the right design for the country. So that will hopefully come out in more detail when the report is published.
Thank you very much, Claire. And then, it seems the answer pleased the person who posed the question, so thank you for that. And then maybe we can pick one. I can see there's some questions around the Caribbean region, if we're providing support there, and also more specifically on Mexico and also Chile. So maybe I can say for the Caribbean region, we've been doing some initial screenings in a number of countries. I recall a specific case that was actually very interesting for the Dominican Republic. We're trying to identify the potential, where would it lay, and what would be the main development risk to be aware of. And in those situations, well, in that case specifically, we identified two things, right? The first key concern was the existence of, endangered bird species, that had migratory paths along of, the right crossing these areas with high wind resources. So these are, we move into new territories, right? That's not something that we've seen in the North Sea in the past, right? And this needs to be taken very seriously. So for that case, for instance, we also identified that there was plenty of room to keep developing onshore wind with existing resource and space on land, and try to de-risk it more from an environmental and social perspective, build on those learnings, and then possibly look at offshore wind eventually, right? So these are some of the learnings that we have on the way. We could maybe make it strategic fit, but sometimes, we find these flaws that needs to be addressed. When it comes to Mexico per se, for instance, yes, this is a country that we're actively looking at, try to see, how we could help the government understand the strategic fit for offshore wind development. It's still early years. There's other connotations around a wider electricity, sector, potential reform, and how things will be shaped. But yeah, it's definitely on the radar. And I can also answer for Chile. As you may know, the World Bank, not through ESMAP, but the World Bank is supporting the ministry, el MEM, Ministry de Energía, in Chile, to develop a roadmap. They've engaged Carbon Trust to support in that journey, and the work is progressing great, and a lot of industry feedback being embedded in that effort, and a very active government. So things are looking very interesting in Chile as well. What else? I'm not sure we have any more questions other than congratulations from one of the three horsemen. Thank you, Gustavo. And I guess it's 2 minutes to go. So I'm not sure. Back to Sean if we close it where we are.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline and Claire, for that the answers, and thanks to everybody for participating in this webinar today. As I said, it's been please go and download this our study on key factors, and it's as I said, if you want to understand sort of the DNA of our program and how we think about these issues, this is the best source for it. So please download it. And because we like to have some fun in the offshore wind program, it's always good to end these webinars with a bit of a joke. So this is a tradition for us. So have you heard, here it is, have you heard about the new publication that we are coming out with to talk about best practices for development of offshore wind ports? So have you heard about our study on best practice in the development of offshore wind ports? It's called Key Factors. So there's one to remember us by. But please do download this report, and thanks to everybody for participating in today's webinar, and particular thanks to Roberta and Gustavo and Karina in particular for having led all the work in Brazil, and for everybody that we work with in the government in Colombia and Brazil for their continued efforts to make offshore wind work in their markets. So thank you very much, and we'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.